On a winter night in a small mountain town, a little girl heard something most people ignored, a faint clinking of a chain beneath the snow. And there, shivering alone in the cold, was a German shepherd with eyes full of history and heartbreak. When her father, a police officer, knelt beside the dog, something stirred in him. A memory, a fear, a hope he did not dare speak. What began as a simple act of compassion soon unraveled into a hidden story of loyalty, corruption, and second chances. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from in the comments. And if you love stories of faith, courage, and the bond between humans and animals, please hit subscribe to support this channel so we can continue bringing these stories to you. Snow had a way of softening even the sharpest edges of North Pine Creek. On winter nights, the little mountain town looked almost like a postcard someone had prayed into existence. Rooftops bowed under layers of white, pine trees standing like dark sentries along the hills, and Main Street glowing with strings of gold and red lights that swayed in the wind. It was the week before Christmas, and the holiday market had spilled out like a warm secret into the cold. Booths lined the sidewalks with steaming cocoa. Handmade quilts, carved wooden toys, and old country music drifting from a portable speaker that crackled now and then. The air smelled of cinnamon, roasted nuts, and exhaust from idling pickup trucks. Above it all, the sky hung low and heavy, clouds swollen with more snow that kept drifting down in lazy, relentless flurries. Ethan Hall walked down the sidewalk with the slightly tired, slightly guarded posture of a man who had seen too many long nights but still couldn't help showing up for the world. He was 37, white, a solid 6 feet tall, with shoulders that had once carried a military pack across deserts and now carried a patrol belt, a radio, and the quiet weight of other people's mistakes. His dark blonde hair was cropped short out of habit. A faint scar ran along his jawline, like an old underline, and there were soft creases at the corners of his blue-gray eyes, lines carved by years of squinting into trouble and years of trying to smile past it. Tonight he was off duty, though the Navy patrol jacket still hung open over a flannel shirt and jeans. He was the kind of man who never entirely took the uniform off. Ethan moved with a measured, controlled grace, as if every step had been trained into him. But the way his gaze softened when he looked down at the small figure by his side betrayed the gentler part of him he tried to keep safe. Lily Hall, 8 years old, walked half a step ahead of him, as if the world were a present she was determined to unwrap first. She was small for her age, white like her father, with long light brown hair escaping from beneath a knitted beanie with a floppy pom-pom, and a scattering of freckles across her nose that made her look like winter had tried to dust her with stars. Her cheeks were pink from the cold. Her gloves were mismatched because she'd insisted the unlucky glove needed a friend, and her eyes, big, hazel, endlessly curious, moved from stall to stall with open wonder. Lily had her father's stubbornness, but none of his practiced caution. Where Ethan hesitated, she ran toward, and where he saw risk, she saw adventure. 2 years earlier, a car accident had taken her mother on an icy road just outside town. Since then, Lily had clung even harder to every scrap of light in front of her, as if determined not to let grief decide who she was. She joked more than most kids, asked questions that cut straight through adult defenses, and believed fiercely in 3 things: angels, hot chocolate, and that her dad was secretly a superhero, even if his back sometimes ached when he knelt down to tie her boots. They stepped into Pinecone Bakery, the little corner shop that had watched generations grow up. The door chimed softly, and a wash of warmth rolled over them, thick with the scent of fresh bread, sugar, and coffee. Behind the counter stood Martha Green, the bakery's owner, a woman in her late 50s, short and round with soft shoulders, light brown skin that creased into 100 friendly lines when she smiled, and dark hair streaked with silver pulled into a messy bun. Martha had the kind of face that made people confess things they never meant to say out loud. She'd run the place since her husband died a decade earlier, and grief had carved her into someone gentle but firm, a woman who refused to let sorrow stop her from frosting cupcakes with ridiculous amounts of sprinkles. She liked to tease, liked to listen, and had a soft spot for cops and kids who looked like they carried more than they should. "Evening, Officer Hall. Off the clock or just pretending?" Martha called, wiping her hands on her apron, which was dusted with flour and smudged with chocolate. Ethan pushed his cap back slightly and offered a small grin. "Off the clock, I promise. My boss tonight is this one right here." He nodded toward Lily. "And she takes payment exclusively in cinnamon rolls." Lily puffed herself up, trying and failing to look stern. "He's exaggerating. I also accept hot chocolate, the marshmallow kind, with extra marshmallows. Like a mountain." Martha chuckled, the sound warm as the ovens behind her. "Well, if the boss says so. 1 cinnamon roll, 1 hot chocolate with a marshmallow avalanche, and a black coffee for the superhero sidekick." "Make it 2 marshmallow avalanches," Ethan said. The sidekicks had a week. They sat at a small table near the window, where they could watch the snow thicken beyond the glass. Lily blew on her hot chocolate, creating ripples among the white marshmallow peaks. Ethan cradled his coffee between his palms, letting the heat soak into his fingers. For a brief, suspended moment, they weren't a widower and his daughter, or a cop, and the only family he had left. They were just 2 souls in a warm bakery, sharing jokes about how the snowflakes were trying out for a Christmas movie. Lily told him about a classmate who had tried to eat yellow snow. "Don't worry, Daddy, it was just food coloring from the art fair, but Ms. Harper almost fainted." And Ethan chuckled, the sound low and rusty, like it hadn't been used enough lately. Outside, the wind picked up, sending spirals of snow across the streetlights. Cars rolled slowly past, with headlights turned hazy by the flurries. The market buzzed on, vendors stamping their feet to stay warm, kids dragging their parents from booth to booth, and speakers crackling through another old holiday song. Time slid gently forward until their cups were mostly empty, and the cinnamon roll was nothing but sticky crumbs on Lily's plate. "Come on, Snowflake," Ethan said, shrugging back into his jacket and pulling on his gloves. "We better head home before the storm decides to get dramatic." Lily hopped off her chair, grabbed their paper bag of extra pastries, Martha's way of quietly sending them off with more than they paid for, and walked with Ethan toward the door. Martha gave them a little wave. "You two stay warm out there. Roads are getting slick." "We will," Ethan replied. "Lock up early if it gets bad." "Don't tell me what to do in my own bakery," Martha shot back with a grin. "Now go before I make you take a dozen more rolls." They stepped back into the night, and the cold hit like an honest hand to the face. The air was sharp, filled with tiny shimmering flakes that stuck to eyelashes and coat sleeves. Streetlights cast halos in the falling snow, and the glow from the market stalls painted soft amber patches on the white sidewalks. North Pine Creek, wrapped in winter, felt at once cozy and fragile, like something precious that could be shattered by the wrong kind of silence. They walked past a booth selling knitted scarves, another with hand-carved wooden angels. Lily's boots squeaked softly in the snow. She was humming under her breath, some half-remembered carol, when she suddenly stopped, her head tilted. Clink. The sound was so small that it barely rose above the murmur of voices and the crunch of tires on slush. A light metallic rattle, almost swallowed by the wind. "Daddy," Lily said, her mitten tugging at his sleeve. "Did you hear that?" Ethan glanced down at her. "Hear what?" She frowned, listening harder, her breath puffing little clouds into the air. "Like a chain or something metal. Over there." She pointed toward the edge of the square, where the lights thinned and the snow seemed to fall heavier. Ethan listened. For a moment there was nothing but the wind and distant laughter. Then, clink, a soft, uncertain jingle, like metal on metal. Years of training tightened his shoulders automatically. Even off-duty, his brain cataloged sounds. Broken glass, raised voices, a weapon dropped on concrete. But this was softer, sadder somehow. He followed Lily's pointing hand with his eyes. At the far corner of the square, where a side street peeled away toward a row of half-empty parking spaces, an old street lamp cast a pool of yellow light that looked tired at its edges. Beyond the last busy stall, people's steps sped up, heads dipping low against the wind. That corner belonged to the snow and the shadows. "Stay close to me," Ethan said quietly. His voice didn't lose its warmth, but it gained a layer of command that Lily recognized. She moved in beside him without argument, slipping her small hand into his gloved one as they stepped away from the crowd. The sounds of the market dulled behind them. The air felt colder here, somehow lonelier, as if the town's music and chatter couldn't quite reach this patch of pavement. The street lamp hummed faintly overhead, light flickering now and then, throwing long, uncertain shadows across the snow-covered sidewalk. That was when they saw him. The German Shepherd lay curled tightly against the base of a metal parking sign, the kind that politely informed drivers when they were allowed to abandon their vehicles. Snow had piled up along the dog's back and sides, clinging to his thick tan and black coat, until he looked almost sculpted from the winter itself. A heavy chain collar circled his neck, a length of metal chain leading to the signpost, where it had been looped and padlocked in a way that spoke not of care, but of an intent to keep him from leaving. The links of the chain quivered when he trembled, giving off that soft, metallic clink that had threaded its way through the noise of the town to Lily's ears. He was older, perhaps 6 or 7 years, a mature German shepherd with the broad chest and strong limbs of a dog trained to work, though those limbs now lay drawn in close, as if he were trying to protect himself from his own shivering. His fur beneath the snow was dulled by dirt and neglect, and along his left shoulder a faint line of scar tissue pulled the coat in an uneven pattern. One of his ears stood tall, the other had a slight fold near the tip, as if it had once taken a blow and healed just a little crooked. His ribs didn't show sharply yet, but his sides were lean in a way that spoke of too many days of not quite enough food. His paws were cracked at the edges, the fur between his toes clumped with ice. Yet his eyes, deep, rich brown, held a flicker of something that hadn't frozen, wary intelligence, a habit of assessing everything, and a tired dignity that refused to beg. Beside him, propped crookedly against the signpost and already damp at the edges from falling snow, was a cardboard sign. Thick black marker had carved the words with impatient strokes. "Injured dog, $20, owner will pick up if not sold." Lily's breath hitched. "Daddy!" Ethan felt his jaw tighten. The anger came not as fire, but as an old, familiar chill, the kind that started in his chest and spread outward. $20. As if the dog were a dented lawn chair someone was trying to get rid of before trash day. As if life could be priced that cheaply. Around them, people passed by with their collars turned up, their eyes sliding over the scene or away from it. Some saw and looked quickly elsewhere, their thoughts already rehearsed. "It's probably some shady thing. Not my business, somebody will deal with it." Others hardly seemed to register the dog at all, focused on not slipping, on the sale at the craft booth 2 stalls over, on getting home before the real storm hit. "Daddy, he's shaking," Lily whispered. Her voice had fallen into that hushed, reverent tone she used for Christmas trees and baby birds. She took a small step forward, then stopped, remembering the way her father had taught her to move around strange animals. The dog's head lifted, slowly, as if it weighed much more than it should. Snow slid from his ears and muzzle, dropping in soft clumps onto the ground. For a moment, his gaze moved past Lily, scanning the square with the automatic sweep of a creature used to watching for threats, used to being the shield between danger and someone else. Then his eyes met Ethan's. It only lasted a heartbeat, a single second in which the yellow streetlight caught the brown of those eyes and turned them into something almost golden. But in that heartbeat, Ethan saw a pattern he knew too well. The way the right ear twitched first at a distant sound, the subtle shift of weight off the back left leg, as though favoring an old injury, the faint white thread of a scar along the shoulder that his thumb had once brushed while tightening a vest strap. Something inside his chest stuttered, then lurched hard enough to make him swallow. No. His rational mind, the part of him that had been trained to separate fact from fear, pushed forward. How many German shepherds looked something like this? How many working dogs came out of similar breeding lines, with similar markings, similar scars from similar work? The odds were high, higher than his heart wanted to admit. 4 months ago, he'd stood in a different room, under fluorescent lights that made every bad news sound worse, and been told that his K9 partner had been transferred and subsequently lost in transit. Words buried in paperwork, said in tones that left no room for protest. He'd mourned in private, because there had been no body to bury, no collar returned, just a blank space where a living presence used to be. "Daddy?" Lily's voice tugged him back. She was watching him now, not the dog, her brows knitting together. She was young, but she knew the look on his face when old ghosts came knocking. Ethan forced his shoulders to relax a fraction. He took a slow breath, steam curling from his lips, and shook his head as if he could dislodge the thought that had flashed through him like lightning. It can't be, he told himself, the words echoing silently in the cold spaces between heartbeats. Ruger is gone. Ruger died. Still, his gaze drifted back to the dog, to the way those eyes hadn't quite let go of his, to the quiet endurance in the way the animal braced against the cold without making a sound. The snow kept falling around them, soft and indifferent. Somewhere behind, the town laughed and shopped and went on with its life. In this small circle of yellow light, Ethan Hall stood very still, caught between the logic that had kept him alive and a rising, irrational whisper in his chest that refused to be silenced. He swallowed once more, jaw tightening, and finally tore his eyes away. But the name he refused to say out loud still pulsed in the back of his mind like a heartbeat that would not stop. It was impossible, he told himself. Absolutely impossible. Because Ruger, his partner, his dog, his shadow through 100 long nights, was supposed to be lost forever. Ruger was supposed to be dead. The storm deepened overnight, as if the sky had decided that North Pine Creek hadn't yet been tested enough by winter. Morning came pale and slow, spreading a muted bluish light across the valley. Snowdrifts leaned against buildings and swallowed curbs, while thin icicles hung from porch roofs like frozen angels reaching downward. The air was bitter enough to sting lungs and bite skin, though the scent of wood smoke curled between houses where fireplaces fought bravely against the season. Ethan Hall pulled his patrol SUV up to the veterinary clinic on the edge of the square, tires crunching through the packed snow. Now, back in uniform, he looked every bit the officer, navy jacket zipped to the collar, badge glinting faintly beneath frost-dusted light, radio clipped to his shoulder. But his expression held something unsettled, something unresolved from the night before. His steps were firm, but faster than usual, purpose tightening each movement. Beside him walked Lily, bundled in layers that nearly swallowed her. Her hair peeked from beneath a fluffy hat, cheeks rosy against the cold, eyes bright with both concern and hope. She clutched a folded blanket she'd taken from their couch, soft, woolen, and smelling faintly of home. Inside the clinic, fluorescent lights cast clean illumination on polished floors and pale green walls. The smell of antiseptic mingled with animal musk. Behind the reception desk sat Janet Floyd, a white woman in her early 40s, tall with a tidy ponytail of dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and teal scrubs that looked crisp even this early. She was brisk, efficient, famously no nonsense. Janet wasn't unkind, but she ran the clinic like a well-oiled machine. Years earlier, she had worked ER triage for humans. After burning through compassion and exhaustion, she shifted to animals, where pain was simpler, motives clearer. Patients never lied to her. "Morning," she said with a nod, professional, clipped. "He's still stable, but weak. Dr. Mason is with him now." Her gaze softened slightly when she looked at Lily, who stood on tiptoe trying to peek past the desk. "He's a strong boy, brave." They were led to the observation room, glass walls dividing it from the treatment area. Inside lay the German shepherd, wrapped in warm pads and blankets. He was awake now, though still weak. One paw twitched occasionally, but his eyes tracked movement with alertness returning. Dr. Mason, the clinic's veterinarian, stood beside him with a tablet. He was a white man in his early 60s, tall and thin, with a wiry frame, hair fully silver, beard neatly trimmed. His gentle voice had soothed countless frightened animals and more than a few frightened owners. He had the weathered look of a man who'd seen both cruelty and healing and tried to lean toward the latter whenever possible. "He's responding," Dr. Mason said, greeting them with a small nod. "Still dehydrated, but he took fluids overnight. Body. Temperature has improved. He's got some bruising on the ribs, old and new, and scarring consistent with prolonged restraint." Lily pressed her palms against the glass, eyes shining as she whispered, "Hi again." The dog lifted his head a little, ears shifting at the familiar voice. Something inside him seemed to relax, not fully, but enough to stop bracing against invisible threats. Dr. Mason continued, "The chain marks on the neck suggest someone kept him tethered a long time. Not a week or two, longer. That kind of abrasion only forms after continuous friction. Janet, listening from the doorway, added, "He didn't bite or growl even once during treatment. No panic snaps. That's a trained response pattern. Someone taught him restraint." Ethan's brow tightened. He asked evenly, "Would a civilian pet behave that way?" Dr. Mason shook his head. "Most pet dogs react defensively to pain. He doesn't. He submits. He tolerates. That's working dog conditioning." A silence stirred between them, measured and heavy. Ethan took a breath, the kind that reached deeper than lungs. Then, with a low and steady voice, he said, "I'd like to confirm something, or rule it out." He stepped toward the glass and gave a soft whistle, followed by a short command. A command that didn't make sense to most people, but meant something precise to one dog in 100. "Ruger, heel." The dog froze, not in fear but recognition. His head lifted fully now, eyes sharpening as if a fog had suddenly thinned. He tried to shift to a sitting position, though his left hind leg trembled visibly. For a few unsteady seconds he moved, slow, weak, but unmistakably toward Ethan's voice. Lily gasped softly. Janet blinked. Dr. Mason lowered his tablet. Ethan's heart clenched. But just as quickly, the shepherd faltered and sank down again, exhausted. Recognition flickered, but physical strength had not caught up yet. Ethan stood very still. I don't know if that's conclusive. Command response could be coincidence. Some dogs learn similar cues. Many are trained in heel commands." But Janet shook her head. "Not with that reaction. That was recognition." Dr. Mason placed a gentle hand on Ethan's arm. "What's going through your mind?" And this was the moment Ethan had been dreading since the previous night. He could feel Lily watching him, waiting. He exhaled. 4 months ago, I served with a K9 unit dog named Ruger. Strongest handler bond I ever had. They said he was being transferred to another precinct. Then, I received a report. Lost in transit, vehicle accident, fatality likely. No body returned, no collar, no remains. Lily turned from the dog to her father, voice small. "Daddy, you cried that week." He touched her shoulder gently but didn't deny it. "Yes, I did." He continued. "The paperwork was sloppy, incomplete. Something never felt right." Dr. Mason absorbed this. If this is Ruger, someone didn't lose him. Someone kept him, or traded him, or tried to dispose of him. That last possibility twisted Ethan's stomach. Lily stepped away from the glass and came to Ethan's side. She didn't say anything, just pressed her mitten into his palm. Ethan's voice lowered. "Before I accept anything emotional, I need proof, no assumptions." He forced control back into his tone. "Does he have a microchip?" Dr. Mason nodded. "We scanned last night. It pinged, but the data was encrypted, flagged as restricted entry." Ethan's pulse spiked. "What level?" Mason looked at him steadily. "Level 3. That was not normal. Not for a dog. Not for a standard K9. Level 3 was reserved for confidential operations. Evidence-sensitive work. Units that might stumble into things bigger than their handlers." Lily whispered, "Is that bad?" Ethan crouched slightly to her height. "It's complicated." In truth, it was more than that. If Ruger had once detected something he wasn't supposed to, if that information had been inconvenient to someone in the chain of command, losing him would have been easier than keeping him. Ethan straightened. "I'm reporting this, not to my precinct, not local. I'm going directly to the State Internal Division." He moved toward the door, hand tightening around his radio. Then, behind him, a soft whine. He turned. The dog had lifted his head again, gazing at him with something raw, half hope, half plea. Not begging, not fearing, just asking one silent question. "Are you still my human?" Ethan's jaw clenched, eyes burning in a way he didn't permit often. He didn't answer aloud, but he stepped back to the glass, rested his palm against it, and Ruger pressed his muzzle gently to the other side, closing that last inch between man and dog. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, something thawed. This might not yet have been proof, but it was enough. And Ethan Hall, who had once sworn an oath to protect and serve, felt another promise stir beneath it. The older one, the personal one. He would not abandon this dog again. Not to cold, not to fate, and certainly not to corruption. Evening came early in North Pine Creek, as it always did in deep winter. By 4:30, the horizon was already sinking into a bruised violet hue, and by 5, the town was wrapped in dark sapphire skies, sprinkled with drifting flakes. The veterinary clinic glowed like a lonely lantern in the snow, warm light spilling through frosted windows, turning each falling snowflake into a shining ghost of itself. Inside, the lobby was dim and quiet, as if the building were trying not to disturb its patients. Ethan Hall walked through the front door with a gentle push, the quiet jingle of the entrance bell sounding almost reverent. He was still in uniform, dark patrol jacket zipped tight, boots thick with packed snow, radio silent at his shoulder. But the most noticeable thing about him was not the badge or the attire, but the softened focus of his gaze, drawn not to desks or paperwork or protocol, but to someone much smaller walking beside him. Lily Hall, 8 years old, slight, wrapped in a puffy coat the color of winter berries, walked forward with deliberate calm. Her father had told her that the dog might be scared, might be disoriented, might need space. And Lily, who usually skipped or danced or hopped or twirled, instead moved with a gentleness rare in children her age. She clutched a book under her arm, a thin children's storybook with worn corners and a cover that showed a smiling puppy beside a little girl. Her voice, when she spoke, was hushed. "Daddy, do you think he remembers being happy?" Ethan paused before answering. He rested a hand lightly on Lily's shoulder. "I think dogs remember love, even when they forget everything else." Then he added softly, "And he had a lot of love before." This time, they didn't go to the observation room with the glass divider. Dr. Mason trusted them now. Ruger had shown no signs of aggression, only exhaustion and vulnerability. So, tonight, the doctor allowed them inside the treatment room itself, as long as Ethan followed handling precautions. Dr. Mason met them at the door, a tall, silver-haired man with calm eyes and careful movements. He looked tired tonight. He'd treated 3 cats and a badly frostbitten husky since noon. But when he saw Lily, his expression warmed. "Go on in. Just remember what we talked about. Slow movements, let him approach you." Ruger lay on a thick padded mat, part bed, part heated support. He was curled at first, a circle of tan and black, tail tucked. But as Lily entered, he lifted his head. His ears responded first, one sharp, one slightly folded, and then his eyes tracked upward. The monitors beside him hummed steadily, glowing softly like artificial stars. Ethan knelt slowly, knees popping faintly. He extended a hand, not close enough to touch, just far enough to say, "I'm here." Ruger's nose quivered, catching scent. Recognition had returned a little more each day. There were moments when the dog's expression changed. No longer that blank, wary stillness of abandonment, but flickers of familiarity. But tonight would belong not to Ethan. Tonight belonged to Lily. She stepped forward, placed her book on the ground beside her, and sat cross-legged on the floor. She did not reach out. She did not rush. She simply began to read. Her voice was soft, a melodic whisper drifting through the sterile air. And the little dog said, "I'm not afraid of the dark, because I have friends who stay beside me." The room changed. Not visually, the lights didn't shift, the walls didn't move, but the feeling changed. The air warmed, the tension eased. Something like hope threaded gently through the quiet. Ruger listened, not just with ears, but with body. His breathing deepened, his paws relaxed, his tail still cautious, uncurled slightly. Then, tentative, he moved. It was a small motion, a scoot, a shifting of weight. But he moved toward Lily. Her hands remained in her lap, exactly where they were. She only smiled, eyes damp at the corners. "It's okay. I'll stay right here." Ethan watched silently, pride and ache mingled in his expression. He had raised his daughter to be brave, yes, but compassion was something she had shaped herself. There was another witness to all this. Janet, the receptionist turned medical assistant tonight, stood near the cabinets. She pretended to organize supplies, but she was watching. The hardened lines of her face softened. She knew animals who responded to kindness, but rarely this quickly, this deeply. She said quietly to Ethan, He remembers her. Not fully, maybe, but enough. Lily kept reading. Then, softly, she began talking instead. You used to play fetch with me in the yard. Do you remember? Her tone was conversational, not pleading. You used to run really fast, and Daddy would pretend you were racing jets. Ruger's ears perked. Again, he inched closer. And I used to pretend I could talk dog language. Lily giggled gently. I wasn't very good at it, though, was I? Maybe it was coincidence, maybe instinct, maybe memory. But Ruger, weak, injured, battered, lifted his muzzle and pressed it gently against Lily's gloved hand. She froze. Then her smile bloomed like dawn. She didn't pet him yet. Instead, she whispered, Thank you. Dr. Mason exhaled quietly. That right there, that's trust. Ethan swallowed hard. He'd seen soldiers freeze inside themselves after trauma. He'd seen men break and rebuild. Ruger's body had been hurt, yes, but something deeper had survived, his ability to choose connection over fear. But then suddenly, Ruger trembled, his legs buckled. The moment Lily felt movement shift, she pulled her hand back, not out of fear, but out of instinct to give space. Ethan reacted swiftly, sliding his arms under Ruger's weight to support him as the dog sagged sideways. Easy, easy! Lily scrambled to action, not panicked, but purposeful. She grabbed the wool blanket she'd brought and tucked it around Ruger's side, careful not to touch sore ribs. Ruger gave a quiet whine, not pain but relief, nestling into warmth. It wasn't enough to stabilize him, but it was enough to make him feel safe. When Ethan lifted him, Ruger didn't resist. He allowed it, head resting against Ethan's shoulder, as if some part of him remembered doing that before. Lily rushed ahead, opening the door to the clinic hallway. Daddy, this way. Janet watched them go, eyes bright. Dr. Mason murmured to himself, Dogs don't forget love. They just get quiet while they wait for it to come back. Out in the parking lot, the snow had thickened again, flakes drifting like silver feathers through the glow of the lampposts. Ethan carried Ruger carefully to the SUV. Lily climbed into the back seat, blanket ready. As they placed Ruger inside, his body sank into the comfort of wool and Lily's gentle presence. She whispered, You're coming with us now. We're not leaving you again. Ethan shut the door, breath clouding the frigid air. For the first time in months, something in him eased, not fixed, not solved, but directed. He looked at his daughter through the window, her hand resting near Ruger's head, and thought, This is how healing starts. He slid into the driver's seat, engine rumbling to life. The clinic lights receded behind them. Ahead lay snow-covered roads, and the beginning of a fight for truth. And so they drove together through the winter night, a father, a child, and a wounded German shepherd, toward a home that had been waiting longer than any of them knew. The next morning arrived wrapped in fog, the pale, icy kind that blurred the pine forests into ghostly silhouettes and made every house on North Pine's outskirts look like it had emerged from a half-remembered dream. Frost Haven Veterinary Clinic stood quietly under a layer of fresh ice, its windows glowing dimly in the early light. Inside, the heaters hummed, wet boot marks tracked across mats, and volunteers murmured like quiet caretakers of fragile creatures. Ethan Hall pushed open the interior door, now in civilian clothes rather than uniform. A thick gray sweater under a worn leather jacket, dark jeans, boots that had seen more than a few winters. His face looked less official this morning, and more human. Tired eyes, unshaven jaw, worry that leaked through even when he tried to stand tall. Ruger lay across a large recovery pad, no longer shivering as violently, though still fragile. Dr. Mason stood beside him, tablet in hand, adjusting IV levels. The veteran veterinarian looked like a man who'd slept in his office chair, silver hair mussed, shirt rumpled, mug of reheated coffee near the sink. But his hands remained steady, and his eyes clear. "Morning," he greeted without looking up. "How is he?" Ethan asked. "Better than last night," Dr. Mason replied. "Hydration improved, fever reduced, but there are findings you need to hear." He touched the screen, zooming in on imaging scans. X-rays, ultrasounds, thermal scans of muscle groups, scars beneath the fur. This here, Mason pointed, is calcification along the left rib cage, indicates healed fractures, not from a single incident, but repeated trauma. Ethan's jaw clenched. Repeated? Yes. Something struck him multiple times over weeks or months. Janet entered then, tall, ponytail neat as always, teal scrubs freshly pressed. But her face bore a tension, tight lips, knitted brows, that revealed she'd overheard the last part. It wasn't just malnourishment or abandonment, she said. This dog was restrained for long periods, and hit. She paused, then added, "That's not negligence, that's coercion." Ethan stared at the scan. His mind turned over gears of memory. How Ruger used to investigate scents, how he once uncovered contraband in a warehouse, how upper brass had been uneasy about certain investigations. Mason continued, voice clinical, but not cold. These abrasions along the neck, pressure scars from thick chain links. And here, he pointed to the hind leg image, ligament damage consistent with forced running or sudden impact. Ethan swallowed. Like a dog being chased rather than directed? Mason nodded slowly. Or a dog being used, then punished when he didn't cooperate. A silence fell, not empty, but heavy. Lily arrived then, guided by Janet. She carried a thermos in both hands and a determined seriousness in her step. She set the thermos on a side table and approached Ruger, sitting cross-legged on the floor. Her voice stayed soft. "I brought broth. The vet said only a little, but I thought he might like something warm." Janet gave a small smile. "We'll let Dr. Mason approve it." Ethan looked between Mason's face and Ruger's beaten body. "I need his official medical report," he said. "Everything you found, every scar, every healed fracture." "You'll have it," Mason replied. "I'll sign it myself." Then he studied Ethan with a question in his gaze. "You think someone from your department?" Ethan didn't let him finish. It wasn't a civilian. His voice hardened. This was someone with access, someone who knew how to handle a working dog, and someone who had a reason to silence him. Mason leaned back slightly, troubled. Janet crossed her arms, not in defiance, but in readiness. If lines were about to be drawn, she would know which side she stood on. Ethan then pulled out his phone. He opened a secure messaging app, the kind only internal law enforcement divisions used. He took photos of Mason's scans, attached them to the encrypted case file he'd started, then typed, "Possible evidence of canine abuse tied to restricted transfer. Further investigation required. Request level 2 oversight." He hit send. The phone locked automatically. Lily, meanwhile, had rolled Ruger onto his other side, gently, slowly, so he could stretch. Ruger allowed it with quiet resignation, not submission, just trust. When she brushed his fur, something caught her eye. A brand mark, not visible from far away, a tiny burned dot just behind the ear. "Daddy, what is this?" Ethan moved closer. He saw it, his face drained. Mason recognized it too. "That's a micro-brand, used for confidential service designations, usually for tracking high-grade contraband sniffer units." Ethan whispered, "They branded him like a classified asset, not a living partner." Janet murmured fiercely, "Asset or not, someone heard him." The console light blinked on Ethan's phone, a reply. Already, he read it. Received, preliminary verification in progress. Do not alert local chain of command, maintain custody of asset. There was that word again. Ethan clenched his fist, but Lily shifted his attention. "Daddy," she said softly, eyes steady on him. "He's not an asset. He's family." And in that moment, everything aligned again. Ethan exhaled. "You're right." He approached Ruger and placed a hand lightly on his head. Ruger closed his eyes in peace. Then Ethan straightened, his voice returning to that quiet steel of command, not over others, but over himself. "From today forward," he said, "I'm keeping every record, every injury, every scar documented. We're building a case." Mason nodded. "And I'll be part of it. No animal ends up like this on my watch." Janet added, without hesitation, "And no doctor's report gets edited or lost. I'll maintain duplicates." Outside, wind gathered force. Snow churned under a gray sky. Winter was tightening. But inside that examination room, a different force was gathering. Resolve, justice, a protective ferocity that would not yield. Ruger shifted slightly and gave a soft chuff, half sigh, half statement. He was still here, still alive, still fighting. And Ethan Hall, once broken by loss, felt something in himself begin to rise again. Not anger, not vengeance, but duty, to truth, to family, to a bond that had been wounded but never severed. The storm lasted 3 full days. Snow blanketed North Pine Creek so thoroughly that the sidewalks disappeared, driveways became vague suggestions, and the mountains beyond town vanished entirely into a gray-white haze. Residents stayed indoors. Cars slept under snow mounds. At night, the wind howled like a memory of wolves roaming long before humans came. During those days, Ethan Hall hardly left the veterinary clinic and the house except for work. But the lines between duty and personal mission blurred more each hour. Ruger remained in recovery, slowly regaining strength. Lily became his constant companion, and Ethan, every spare minute, worked. He set up a space at the clinic's break table, laptop open, files spread across the wood surface, printed scans lined up. Dr. Mason printed duplicates of all medical evidence. Janet ensured backup copies were stored off-system. By the second night, Ethan received more replies from the state internal division, not publicly, not through official channels, but encrypted, case number assigned, K91C internal, level 2 investigation now active. Be advised, do not inform precinct leadership. Evidence suggests internal compromise. Maintain protective custody of K9 subject, Ruger. Those lines confirmed what Ethan already suspected. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't incompetence. It wasn't paperwork lost in a shuffle. It was a cover-up, and possibly a crime. On the 4th evening, the snow finally calmed, the wind hushed, and the town, tentative, exhaled relief. The streetlights glowed amber over untouched snow. Ethan drove to the clinic again after his shift ended, Lily in the passenger seat this time, instead of the back. She was allowed up front only during special days, and this was one. "Daddy?" she asked quietly. "If someone hurt Ruger, is that person going to be punished?" Ethan's hands tightened around the steering wheel. "Yes," he said simply. There was no hesitation now, not anymore. Inside the clinic, they found Ruger standing on his own paws, still thinner than before, still moving with care, but upright, strong enough to hold himself steady. When Lily entered, he gave a quiet huff of greeting, tail wagging once, then twice. She laughed softly. "Daddy, look, he's doing better." Dr. Mason entered moments later, carrying a clipboard and exhaustion like a heavy scarf. But his smile was genuine. "He's healing faster than expected. Muscle tone is returning." Ruger walked, slowly, awkwardly, but walked, all the way to Lily, where he pressed his head against her side. She wrapped her arms around his neck gently. Ethan watched, emotion silent but potent in his chest. Then Dr. Mason turned to him. "We need to talk." Ethan followed him into the side office. The desk lamp cast a warm circle of light across case files, incident logs, and photographs. Mason closed the door. "I reviewed all evidence," he began, "and I consulted a colleague who used to run a military K9 rehabilitation unit in Nevada." Ethan listened, muscles tense. Mason continued. "He says these injuries are absolutely consistent with forced tracking work, followed by punitive beating when the dog failed to deliver, or refused to cooperate." Ethan's face hardened. Mason tapped the microbrand photo. "And this suggests Ruger was used for operations off the official record. Someone wanted him trained, but not documented." Then Mason gave Ethan a grave, slow nod. "You're doing the right thing. Keep going." Ethan left the office and returned to the examination room. There, he made a decision. He approached Ruger, knelt before him, looked into those brown eyes, tired but regaining their old steadiness, and Ethan spoke quietly, but with the solemn sincerity of a vow, "No one will hurt you again. I swear." Ruger leaned forward and nuzzled Ethan's shoulder. It felt like an oath sealed, and that night, they left the clinic together, not with Ruger in Ethan's arms this time, but walking beside them, albeit slowly, with a soft lifting of pride in his posture. Lily held the leash loosely. Though Ruger hardly needed it, he walked beside her because he chose to. When they reached home, the living room fireplace was already lit. Ethan had stacked fresh logs earlier that afternoon. The house glowed warm and quiet. Family photographs lined the mantel, including one of Ethan holding a much younger Lily, and another of Ethan in uniform kneeling beside a younger, stronger Ruger, clear-eyed, bright-furred, ready for the world. Lily, noticing Ruger gaze at that photo, whispered, "It's still you, and you're coming back, piece by piece." Ruger's ears flicked. Later that evening, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch with a quilt draped over her and Ruger curled beside her feet, Ethan returned to his laptop, now set on the coffee table. The fire popped softly. The room glowed ember orange. The storm outside made no sound. He opened voice call encryption and reached Tom Reyes. Tom, mid-40s, Latino, broad-shouldered, with a voice like gravel, had served in the same K-9 unit before transferring to another county. He had always been suspicious of Ruger's disappearance. On the screen, Tom leaned close, face lit by monitor glow. "You found him, didn't you?" "Yes." Ethan's voice cracked slightly. "And he didn't run away. He was taken." Tom swore under his breath. "I knew it. I knew something smelled wrong." Ethan nodded. "I'm forwarding all medical reports. Internal Division has opened a case. And Tom," his expression sharpened, "I need every scrap of memory you have from Ruger's last week. Everything unusual, every person who handled paperwork, every superior who acted different." Tom leaned back slowly. "There was one night, 2 days before he transferred. Ruger alerted on something in the warehouse at Hillcrest Cargo Depot." Ethan felt the room tilt slightly. "I remember that," Tom continued. "We found a stash, wasn't drugs, wasn't weapons, looked like smuggled tech components, small, expensive sealed cases, boxes marked with fake agricultural stamps." "And what happened to them?" Tom's jaw tightened. "They got redirected, and the report disappeared." Ethan felt his pulse hammer. So Ruger didn't fail a command. He discovered something he wasn't supposed to. "And somebody made sure he didn't do it again," Tom finished. A long silence hung in the glow of the fire. Then Tom's eyes narrowed with a fierce promise. "If you're going after this, you won't be doing it alone." After the call ended, Ethan closed the laptop and rubbed his eyes. He was tired, bone-deep tired, but awake inside, more awake than he'd been in months. Behind him, Ruger had lifted his head, just watching. Quiet, steady. Ethan sat beside him. Ruger leaned into him. No words, no explanation needed. Two partners, reuniting, remembering, preparing. Outside, snow sifted through moon-glazed clouds. Inside, in the warm halo of the firelight, Ethan understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't merely about one injured dog. It wasn't even about corruption in a single precinct. It was about truth, about loyalty, about a man fulfilling a promise he once made beside a different fire years ago, to stand by his partner in all things. And this time, that promise would be kept. The hearings did not happen in a single explosive burst of drama, as movies might show. Instead, they unfolded like slow, heavy gears grinding into motion. The machinery of accountability turning reluctantly, but inevitably. Winter had begun to loosen its grip on North Pine Creek. Icicles thinned, roofs dripped, and the hard-edged snow softened around the edges. But even as the world thawed, Ethan's resolve only sharpened. It began with small steps, a subpoena issued here, a file request there. The state internal division sent investigators, unmarked vehicles, plainclothes agents, no sensational announcements. They didn't want attention, they wanted truth. Ethan cooperated fully, providing not just the evidence, but the context, the body language of supervisors during the transfer, the missing shipment report, the chain of command discrepancies. Dr. Mason and Janet provided sworn medical statements detailing Ruger's injuries, dates, severity, probable causes. And slowly, bit by bit, small lies began to crumble. In the center of this quiet storm, Ruger continued to heal. His fur regained shine, ribs receded under healthy weight, and the tremor in his hind leg diminished. He resumed habits he once had, head tilted alert at door knocks, ears flicking toward radios, tail wagging at familiar footsteps. But he also adopted new patterns, resting his head in Lily's lap during her homework, settling at Ethan's foot without being commanded, occasionally huffing in a lazy contentment that felt like a sigh of home. Ethan remained on active duty during the investigation, but his daily life changed. There was an awareness in his precinct, like wind shifting before a storm, that something was happening behind the scenes. Some officers avoided him, some whispered, others surprisingly nodded with respect. More than a few sent quiet messages. Good on you. Keep pushing. This needed to come out. The man at the center of it all, the former deputy chief, maintained brittle confidence publicly. He insisted Ruger had been properly transferred, that any records missing were merely clerical errors, that any injuries sustained must have been from Ruger escaping and encountering hazards. But the walls around him were collapsing slowly. Internal GPS logs from the supposed transport showed inconsistencies. Voicemail snippets surfaced. Witness statements emerged. Still, the final hearing was necessary. It took place at a regional administrative building, a square structure of brown brick that looked plain on the outside, but inside echoed with quiet gravity. Ethan arrived in formal attire, dark gray suit, white shirt, modest tie. Lily and Ruger stayed home under the care of Janet, who volunteered to watch them both. Lily had asked to come, but Ethan gently refused. This part is adult business. We'll bring you in at the good part, after it's done. Inside, Ethan stood before a panel of 5 officials. The room had no theatrics, no audience, just seriousness. The investigators asked their questions methodically. Did you have any reason to believe at the time that Ruger's transfer orders were falsified? Yes. Explain the discrepancy in time-stamped logs. Ethan did. Confirm for the record, Ruger recognized your command language upon recovery? Yes. And his injuries, consistent with deliberate restraint and post-operative neglect. Every answer was precise, every memory sharp. Ethan did not allow himself the indulgence of anger, only clarity. Then came the turning point. The state prosecutor presented a piece of evidence, the one Tom Reyes had risked going on record for, a warehouse camera clip from Hillcrest Cargo Depot. Low resolution, grainy, but unmistakable. Ruger alerting on a sealed container, the same container later redirected. And in that clip, standing to the side, arms folded, eyes narrowed, the deputy chief himself. That was the moment, not a dramatic confession, not an emotional breakdown, just silence. A silence that admitted guilt more loudly than words. Weeks passed, process followed process. Official rulings were issued, obstruction of evidence, abuse of service animal, falsification of records, participation in smuggling. The deputy chief was removed, then indicted. Others were disciplined, suspended, reassigned. And somewhere along the way the narrative shifted, from a lost dog story to a broken system being forced to reckon with itself. But the most personal victory came in the form of a single piece of paper. It arrived at Ethan's house in a crisp envelope. The letterhead read, Office of State K-9 Operations Review. Inside it stated, Ruger, K-9 Service Designation, formally retired. Handler recommendation approved, permanent adoption authorization granted to Ethan Hall. Effective immediately, Ethan stood in the kitchen, reading it 3 times. Not because he didn't understand, but because understanding it filled him too deeply. Lily was the first to see his face. She padded in wearing socks with little snowflakes on them, hair in messy braids. Daddy, is it bad news? Ethan knelt, held out the letter. Her eyes moved quickly over the words, and then widened like sunrise breaking over a ridge. He's ours? Yes, Ethan replied quietly. Officially, permanently. Lily didn't shout or jump. She simply turned, walked into the living room, and knelt before Ruger, who was stretched comfortably on the rug. She hugged his neck, pressed her cheek to his fur, and whispered, You're home, forever. Ruger closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. That night, they celebrated in simple ways. hot cocoa for Lily, black coffee with a splash of bourbon for Ethan, a new chew toy and grilled chicken bits for Ruger, who accepted both with dignified pleasure. Months passed, snow melted, roads cleared, spring brushed green back into the world. Ethan left his old precinct and accepted a position as deputy sheriff in a quiet county nearby, one where integrity mattered, one where he could build something better. On his first shift there, he got into the patrol SUV, and this time, the passenger seat was not empty. Ruger hopped up, strong now, eyes bright, a calm assurance in his posture, not working, not commanded, just riding along, as a partner once more. On the back seat, Lily hummed a tune she'd learned for the school talent day. She stretched her leg across the seat and reached forward to rest her hand briefly on Ruger's back. Outside the windshield, the road stretched ahead, lined with budding trees and soft morning light. The town in the distance looked warm and welcoming. Ethan glanced at his daughter, then at his dog, then at the horizon. In that moment, he understood something profound. Some winters never fully leave us. Some scars never fully fade. But when love and truth walk side by side, even the coldest season eventually breaks. The past rested behind them now, not forgotten, but transformed. And the future? It belonged to the ones who stayed, who endured, who chose healing, who made home from the pieces left behind. A father, a daughter, and a German shepherd once forsaken, now whole again, going forward into brighter days. Sometimes the miracles God sends into our lives do not arrive with thunder or bright angels. Sometimes they come quietly, through the loyalty of a dog who refuses to give up, through the courage of a man who chooses compassion over convenience, and through the small voice of a child who believes that love is worth fighting for. In our everyday life, we face storms of our own moments of fear, injustice, loneliness, or doubt. But God walks beside us even when we do not realize it. He guides our steps, strengthens our hearts, and brings healing through the people and creatures He places in our path. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need encouragement today. Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you stories of faith, hope, and love. May God bless you and your family with peace, protection, and strength. And if you believe in the quiet miracles He still works in this world, type Amen in the comments to affirm your faith. Thank you for supporting this channel by subscribing.